Hello, my name is Dr. Alvaro Huerta, and I'm an assistant professor here at Cal Poly Pomona. And I'm very happy to be part of this webinar. I'll be facilitating the webinar, and I'll also be uh, introducing our expert panelists, and we'll have some Q&A towards the end of the session. I am an alumni of UCLA.
Yes, hi, is that Brandy?
I received my bachelor's in
Yes.
history, my master's in urban planning, and I received a Ph.D. at UC Berkeley. UCLA is a great public university, and we need to take advantage of this great opportunity that we have here today to make a call to all Bruins and all alumni and everybody that has to do with social justice and equality in this country. In order for us to get ahead and make a significant change in this country, we need to make sure that our voices are heard and that we are collective in our responses. UCLA, like UC Berkeley and other great universities, have historically been at the forefront of social movements. And this is something that we need to understand and we need to move forward with. And as young people, as students that historically have led revolutions, have led change throughout the world. We see this in Paris in the 1960s. We see this in the 1960s and 70s. Students were the ones that stopped the war in Vietnam. We had great alumni at UCLA, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for example, that was protesting the war in Vietnam in the early 1970s. At UC Berkeley, we had the free speech movement. So the university is an incredible place for young people to learn about history, to gain their consciousness, and to make a difference in the world. This is what the university is about. We are not supposed to agree on everything, but we should be able to have a dialogue in a respectful manner where our ideas are shared. And unfortunately, when it comes to immigration and immigrants, the ideas that come across in this country are never those from the immigrants themselves. They're never from those at the bottom. You never hear my mother, my late mother, domestic worker, and women like that have a national platform to speak about what is the negative impacts of US policies in terms of immigration against her and women like her. You never hear people like my late father and other people that worked during the Bracero program and agricultural and also as a factory worker. You never hear their voices spoken in CNN or in Congress. And so their voices are silent. So it's up to us, the children of immigrants, it's up to us, immigrants, like the great panelists that I'm going to introduce, that should voice and have the moral imperative to speak about the key points and the key issues impacting the United States as it relates to immigration. So this is what I believe, and this is where personally I received my introduction to social justice as a student activist at UCLA, waging the first hunger strike in demanding that the university provide undocumented students with aid, waging a campaign against divestment in South Africa, and waging a campaign against the US involvement in Central America, where we have hundreds of thousands of Salvadorians in this country, not because they chose to come to this country, but because the United States intervened militarily in supporting brutal regimes that forced hundreds of thousands of Salvadorians to come to this country. So we should be clear that when we're talking about immigration, it's a complex issue. It's not just about economics, it's about war, it's about US interventions, and it also has to do with free trade agreements that benefit the rich. Like Donald Trump, I'm against NAFTA. And it was a Democrat, Bill Clinton, that signed NAFTA. Because of NAFTA, we have hundreds of thousands of Mexicans that have been displaced from their land, agricultural lands, and are forced to come to the United States to work. So why should they be victimized once they're here when it was this free trade agreement by a Democrat that forced them in the first place? So this is what I mean about we need to be critical. We need to ask critical questions. I'm not here to try to convince anybody about my views. I'm just trying to say that as a son of an immigrant, as somebody who witnessed and heard how my mother suffered and how my father suffered as an immigrant here, sacrificing their entire lives to make this country a great economic power, but they did not receive the benefits. They did not receive the benefits and the respect that they deserved. For my mother, 40 years as a domestic worker, for my father coming as a bracero in the 1950s, only to be sprayed and forced to strip naked and be sprayed with DDT before he arrived in this country, and living in awful conditions. So when Americans and American leaders talk about the cost of immigration to Americans, I ask, as a son of an immigrant, as an advocate, as a scholar, as an author, as somebody who has spoken at national universities, what about the cost to the immigrant? Are we not human? Are we not human too? When we think about the DREAM Act, for example, the DREAM Act has the word alien in it. Why should we accept that? No human being is an alien. I remember as a kid seeing my father's green card, and it said resident alien. And I was too young and too ignorant at the time to realize that there was something wrong with that, but it didn't register to me. I mean, did he come from Mars? What planet did he come from? Why is it that this country dehumanizes a group of people, whether they're Mexicans, whether they're Salvadorians, whether they're Filipinos, Chinese, or Koreans, when all they have done since the 1800s and before that is contribute greatly to this country, to build the infrastructure, the railroads with the Chinese and the Mexicans, the agriculture in California with the Japanese and the Filipinos, and everything that has to do with the progress of this country, it has to do with immigration. And at the end of the day, for us, for those of us who are Mexican, this is something that is personal and is not just an academic issue, because this is a question of us being tied to the land and us have historical roots to this land. So when we talk about immigration, we need to look at it historically. We need to look at it in terms of what is the role that the United States plays in terms of domestic programs, but also international programs and interventions, whether it's in Vietnam, where you have Vietnamese coming as refugees thereafter, whether it's in Central America, where you have Salvadorians and Nicaraguenses, or whether it's Mexicans through NAFTA, and even before that, in terms of U.S. intervention in Mexico in 1846. So this is the way I feel, and this is pretty much, from my perspective as an academic, as a son of an immigrant, as an activist, is I believe that we need to look at immigration holistically in a complex manner, and what is the role that the United States plays to begin with, so that we don't look at it as a good guy, bad guy, where the American is always the good guy and they're there to save the day, and they're just victims of all these brown people, coming to take their jobs and so on and so forth. So we need to get away from these simplistic interpretations of why is it that we have an immigration problem to begin with. And I will end with this. There is not an immigration problem for employers because they're benefiting from our labor. There's not an immigration problem from the government because they receive the Social Security benefits, the deductions from immigrants, but the immigrants are not able to obtain them because of the lack of legal status. So with that, I just want to close with those, and at least in my part, some introductory comments. And I want to introduce you to three brilliant immigrant activists and people that are directly impacted by what's happening today in our country, and given an opportunity for them to speak for themselves, not just about their lives, but maybe the people that they work with, and then what is it that we can do as a community, not just at UCLA, but in throughout the country. So we're going to start with Valeria, and she'll provide some comments, and then we're going to move on to Seth, and then thereafter Evelyn will have some comments. So Valeria.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Huerta, for that great introduction and really, bringing this foundation to the rest of the conversation that we're going to have. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Valeria Garcia, and I'm the director of the Undocumented Student Program here at UCLA. I've had the honor and privilege of working alongside our many undocumented students here at UCLA who are very strong advocates and really leading the movement, and a lot of change happening at the institution, but also happening at their communities. I want to start by saying that undocumented student issues are not new, right? Undocumented students have been fighting for access and equity in higher ed for a very long time. I think what we saw recently with, the rhetoric and the criminalization of undocumented students in our communities was really heightened during the presidential campaign and during the presidential election. So I think it's important for us to know that, this movement has been around for a very long time. And with that, I'll start with sharing a little bit more about our undocumented students. And I'm going to focus this on the day after election. So, the day after election was probably one of the hardest days for myself, for my staff, for, our institutions, for many people across the nation. At the undocumented student program, we actually didn't have anything planned. We didn't anticipate the results, but we quickly had to mobilize and create a space where our students can come together and share, their thoughts and their feelings. We called it our healing space, and it was a very needed space. Just by looking at the students who came into the room, you can just see how demoralized, how hurt they were, how much pain they were in. You can tell by their body language, you can tell by their tears. They were so confused, they were uncertain, they were scared. And what makes it even more painful for me was, hearing the questions that students were asking. They were asking, will I get deported? How fast is it for breaks to happen in our communities and for us to be back in our country of origin? They asked questions about how am I going to pay for school, given, the conversation that was alluded that DACA would be terminated. And some students even asked if it's worth it for them to continue their education. So these are some of the conversations that happened just that day alone during this, healing space. And it was very hard. I think it's hard for me as an educator to not have the responses, to not be able to say, it's going to be okay, because we don't know. And there is a lot of uncertainty. So what I want, alumni, I want you to think about, being an alumni at UCLA, whether that was 10 years, 10 plus years, or recently. Think about just being a student, what that was like. Think about those late nights that you stayed up trying to finish a paper, midterm week, finals week, all of the work going on, trying to gain professional experience and access those scholarships and internships, and just, I'm thinking about mine, and I struggled. But now think about doing all of that and grappling with your immigration status, right? And realizing some of these opportunities are not available to me, or realizing I cannot go in a specific field because they're asking me to fulfill an internship that requires me to have a Social Security number. So if you think about the difficulty it is to be at a top tier university, and just couple that with immigration status, and the questions that our students are, will I be okay? Will my family be okay? Will my community be okay? This is what our students feel on a day-to-day basis. And it's very heart-wrenching. So here at UCLA, I think we're very fortunate to have an undocumented student program that serves specifically this community. And it's a very small community. We serve more than 600 students. We have graduate students, and we even have students in the med school. So it's a very great time to be able to experience and be able to say, like, we welcome and we serve students. Although coupled with with the political climate, it's been very very hard. But we try to serve our students holistically. We think about their needs in a very holistic manner, where we really want to focus on mental health, right? We do know that in the community, the stress, the anxiety, the fear is very high, particularly now. So we partner with departments like the counseling and psychological services to be able to offer specific groups or specific counseling groups for our undocumented students. We think about financial aid, and we think about how do we prepare students to be able to, or be more financial literate, right? We think about legal services. In fact, 5 months ago, we hired an attorney, an in-house attorney, to provide our students and their families with free legal services, which is a great, I think, great feat that we've had. And really, I want to articulate again that it has been a lot student-led. It's been really student movement that have been asking for all of these sort of support services for our students. And lastly, we also have and offer opportunities where students can engage with other undocumented students through peer-to-peer counseling, through informal conversation. And this is being done through organizations like Ideas and the sub-organizations that USpark and Task for Us that has emerged, that has really they have emerged to be able to provide more holistic support to our students. And so that's a little bit about what we do. And maybe you're asking, well, what can I do, right? How can I get involved? For those of you joining, you're taking time out of your day because you are invested and you want to learn. And I want to offer you opportunities to connect with us or to support our students. What I would love to see is a creation of an undocumented alumni association. It would be great to be able to tap into that resource and be able to connect students with role models, with individuals who've already gone through this, who can offer reassurance for the hard times that lie ahead, who can empower or continue to empower our students. Again, especially thinking about the students who've asked us, like, is it worth for me to continue my education at this point? Being able to, create a mentorship program where students can see you and talk to you and listen to you, I think would be such a wonderful opportunity for us to show our students that, despite all the obstacles that may continue to emerge, we can get through this as a community. And I think lastly, what an alumni association does, it provides the reassurance. The reassurance that there is a community behind our students, right? It's lonely, for folks who may have experience being undocumented, who may not be out there just yet, or who may are still grappling with that identity. It can be a lonely and isolated experience. So for me, like, being able to create a larger network, being able to tell our students, like, you're not alone, we have a community, we're here to support you, I think would be such a beautiful way to remind our students that we want them to succeed. And lastly, the other way that individuals who are able to can support is by investing in the education of our students through a financial donation. Even though in California, we've seen specific laws that now are granting, state financial aid to some undocumented students, right? I want to make sure that we know that not all students qualify for these legislation. We still see that there is about an $8,000 to $9,000 gap between students' financial aid and their expenses. So students are still struggling. Students are not able to live near or by campus, and they're commuting sometimes 2 to 3 hours one way just to make it to campus. So financial, seems to be still one of the barriers and challenges that undocumented students face in pursuit of education. And so what I invite you, again, if you're invested, if you're interested, if you want to support our students, just, and subsidize some of their educational expenses, I invite you to visit our website. You can visit us at www.usp.ucla.edu. On the right-hand corner, you will see a big yellow button that says Give Now. Please, we accept whatever it is that you can offer, $5, $100, $1,000, what have you. But I can assure you that your contribution will, positively and impact And not just this moment. You know, our undocumented students know who's invested in them, and they're always grateful. They will positively impact the success that our students will have at UCLA, and also, you know, impact the next leaders, the next generation of leaders that we will have not only in California, but across the nation. So I thank you for taking the time to listen. You know, thank you for joining us. If you're interested in learning how you can, you know, work more closely with the Undocumented Student Program, you can find my website or my email, I'm sorry, on the website, www.usp.ucla.edu, and I would love to connect with you. I would love to hear your ideas. I would like to, again, you know, create a bigger community to continue to support our undocumented students. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's fantastic. Gracias, Valeria. Now we're going to move on to Seth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Seth, and I'm an undocumented immigrant originally from the Philippines. And I'm grateful to share space with you all today digitally and share with you some of the experiences that a lot of undocumented students currently or before has had navigating institutions that are often not the most friendly for undocumented immigrants in general. I graduated from high school in 2010 as an undocumented immigrant. That was the time before any piece of policy was available to support undocumented immigrant. This was before the time that California DREAM Act was available that would provide financial aid for undocumented immigrants. This was before the time that even scholarships are available for undocumented immigrants, and before the time that deferred action for childhood arrivals was available so that undocumented immigrants can be able to work and be able to fund their livelihoods. When I graduated from high school, the only reason that I was really able to go to UCLA is because of the support of my educators, my friends in high school, and my family and my community. They realized that because I was undocumented, nothing was available for me in terms of financial resources to go to college. So they held fundraisers for me, bake sales, everything literally. They even brought me to the game show The Price is Right, where I was able to get funds from Drew Carey, the TV host, so that I would be able to go to college. Even though we didn't get called to come on down to actually play the game, I was able to get money directly from Drew Carey, who heard about my story, and that was how I was able to go to my first quarter at UCLA and pay tuition. But you know, I really am privileged in many ways as an undocumented immigrant. How many undocumented immigrants are in this country and are able to access higher education or live their lives with dignity? You know, even when I was going to college, the statistics was that 60,000 undocumented youth would graduate from high school every year, but only about 10 to 15% of us were able to go to college. Not because we're not capable, not because we're not good enough, but because of the policies that are not available to support the growth and the development of undocumented immigrants. Not, you know, and it's a big misconception that folks have, you know, that education is a free handout that's given to undocumented immigrants. Often, you know, we really fight our way, you know, to be able to live to our aspirations and do the things that we want with our lives, you know. And I think often folks have this misconception also, you know, that this moment really does present an urgency for all communities of color, for undocumented immigrants, you know, with the Trump presidency, you know, on its 4th day or 5th day now. And President Trump is also expected to sign executive actions around immigration in the coming days. But, you know, the reality is that before Donald Trump even came into power, former President Obama has deported the most immigrants in the history of this country, with 2.5 million deportations. He has criminalized, detained, and deported many immigrants. So the number that President Trump, says 3 million deportations that he wants to do, that's really not new to the immigrant community, who has experienced so much criminalization, and really dehumanization in how we are treated, often just as free labor in this country. And I think, it's important to think about, when we support undocumented students as the theme of this webinar, we can't just think of undocumented students as mere individuals, as one student, who goes to UCLA. We got to understand that I, as an undocumented immigrant, am part of a family. I have parents, I have brothers, I have sisters, I'm part of a community, I'm part of a neighborhood. And whatever happens to my community, whatever happens to my neighborhood, whatever happens to my family is directly going to impact me. When I was going to UCLA, people were always asking me, how can I support you? The institution was thinking of just supporting the student that is within the premises of their infrastructure. But they weren't asking how they can support my parents, how they can support my family. When my dad had to go back to the Philippines, no one was asking, how's my family doing? How's your dad doing? I think we got to recognize that whatever happens to my family, whatever happens to the families of the undocumented students that Valeria serves in the undocumented students program, that's going to have a direct impact on the ability of a student, to live, fully, whether as a student or as a part of a community. Whatever happens to their parents, will really have an impact on them, not having access to healthcare. Our parents are just as susceptible to getting illnesses, even though they're not allowed to access healthcare, but they're just as easily likely to get sick as anybody else. But no one's asking about them. No one's asking about the parents that are being detained and are being deported. And I think we really need to reframe how we understand supporting undocumented students, undocumented Bruins, and really think about it in a bigger context, that we are part of different communities. And I just want to close by saying that really going to be very difficult next 4 years, but in many ways, it's exciting that we have this opportunity to stand in solidarity with each other, to really not just mobilize, but to organize ourselves so that we can resist and fight the policies that are going to be impacting our lives in the coming days. And I think we need to recognize that whatever happens to one member of our community will eventually have an impact to all of us. So I think how are we going to react to this moment is really an important decision and an important choice that we have in front of us. Thanks.
Gracias, Seth. Now we're going to move on to Evelyn.
Thank you, Dr. Huerta. My name is Evelyn Cortez-Davis. I graduated from UCLA in 1992 with a degree in civil engineering. I was an undocumented student from the age of 12, 7th grade, until my second year at UCLA. I immigrated to the United States with my family at the age of 12 from El Salvador, basically fleeing the civil war that was happening at the time. When I had the opportunity to apply to college, because of my undocumented status, I was not able to really expand and apply to a lot of different places. So I only applied to UCLA. I was fortunate enough that I was accepted into UCLA. And this was during a time before Assembly Bill 540, the California Dream Act, or DACA, any of those programs were in place. But there was something in place called the Leticia A decision. And I, at that point in time, was not aware of what this law meant. What I did know is that I was given the opportunity to receive financial aid and the ability to pay in-state tuition with my status as a resident of California, if not a permanent resident at the time. The challenges that undocumented students face, it's difficult to understand if you have not personally experienced this. Having a network, having a group and support, basically the on-campus family, is something that I went through my years at UCLA as an undocumented student not having, and I can certainly value the programs that Valeria and the university have put together to support undocumented students now. One thing to bear in mind is, I had no control over my status. I arrived when I was a child, and when I was afforded the opportunity to have a path to legalization, it was through the Amnesty Act of 1986 that was signed into law by Ronald Reagan. This is the only reason I am sitting here today as a civil engineer for the past 25 years, and having contributed back to the economy, paid back every cent invested in my higher education over 10 times. And I, just through the income taxes alone, I had a wish to not forget what my experience was like, what my family's immigration story was about, because so many of my my family members were actually born here after I arrived, and they did not know why we were here necessarily. And so I decided to write a story about my family's immigration, the reasons why we immigrated to the United States. And so I self-published this book really just for my family, and found later that there were so many different people that were identifying with this experience of fleeing really a situation that was untenable in my home country of El Salvador, that we were willing to accept as a family a status of being really underground and not being able to disclose to anyone what our situation was. We essentially had one law that we were not complying with when we entered the country, and then proceeded to live our lives for decades, basically with two parents working, attending school, and being basically 100% law-abiding at that time. That's not necessarily the picture that's being painted today of what the undocumented immigrant community is. I worked very hard in school, and I knew that if I were afforded the opportunity to go to university, that I couldn't squander it. And when I was accepted into the UCLA engineering program, I had a lot of decisions to make. I wasn't receiving all the financial aid that there may be misconceptions out there about how much financial aid these students are receiving. There were a lot of struggles. I can echo the same sorts of struggles that Seth was referring to. So one of the things that we want to bear in mind is, in order to really move forward as a community, if you in the audience today have the ability to vote and effect change through a vote, that's a voice that this community needs more than ever. I've had that opportunity to exercise my voice through my vote for quite a long time now, and I make sure that I do exercise that right as every election comes around. There are some concrete things that I would recommend if you're wondering how to support the undocumented community, not just the students, but the community at large. One of the things is to definitely get ready for the midterm elections in 2018. We understand everybody has the right to their own political beliefs. If you're seeking to support the undocumented community, there's a clear line of where those supporters are within our political system. One of the things that I want to encourage you to do is, if you have the ability to follow specific groups within social media, groups like MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or the National Council of La Raza, the Coalition of Humane Immigrant Rights in Los Angeles, CHIRLA. These are groups that are essentially putting out calls to action all the time. Some of them involve contacting your members of Congress. One of the things that I want to do that it's easy right now, that you can do right now, is to program this phone number into your phone. It's 202-225-3121. This is the Congress switchboard. And if you contact this phone number, you don't even have to know who your representatives are. Just give them your zip code, and they'll put you through to the office of whoever you need to speak your mind, and exercise that voice that you have as the member of this community. One of the things that I want to echo is you can support very concretely by supporting the undocumented student program. Like Valeria said, I'm going to echo that. You can go to usp.ucla.edu and donate $1, $3, $10, $1,000. Anything in between or more than that is welcome, and no donation is too small, because once we begin to really invest in that youth is when we start to see the rewards as a state and as a country. And then the last thing that I want to share that I would encourage everyone here to do is to speak up. Find that voice and speak up for your undocumented brothers and sisters in the community, because the reality is there's a lot of hurtful language going around today that is very demoralizing, and it's very it's egregious. And when you hear something like that and you wonder, are there any examples out there of undocumented immigrants who are making a difference, who are taking every single opportunity that has been afforded to them and making the absolute most of it? The answer is absolutely. There are, and some of them are at UCLA, some of them are within other parts of the community, but regardless, they are making positive contributions. One of the things that I'm involved with right now is a project to try to develop profiles of some of these individuals that came here as undocumented, but have since been given the opportunity to a path to legalization or citizenship. And the truth is that there's a lot of us. I am not alone here. If you go to this website, thepowerofyou.us, you can start to really read about some of those individuals that are out there effecting change and making positive contributions to our various different communities, as organizers, as environmentalists, as attorneys, as priests, as engineers, as I am myself. And so there isn't one face. We are not a monolithic group of people that are lawbreakers. We are very diverse people that are making a good faith effort to contribute as much as we can. And we want to be able to speak up for them and for each other. And that's what I had to say today.
Thank you, Evelyn. I think as you all can see, we have 3 fine examples here of immigrants or children of immigrants that are really role models in our communities. There's a big myth out there that Latinos and Filipinos don't value higher education, and we can see that if given the opportunity, we have individuals that are highly educated and very smart, but also are interested in not just helping themselves, but helping their families as well and communities, and making that sacrifice of looking out for the public good, looking out for los de abajo, for those at the bottom. So for us, it's not just a question of laws and presidents. It's a question of treating each other as human beings. There's been a lot of questions, a lot of hate mail that I've been receiving, and it has to do with trying to label us as not undocumented, but as illegal and lawbreakers and things of that nature. And I would just like to say this. I think what's important here is that we need to get away from these labels that are hurtful, that are dehumanizing, and we need to see each other as human beings first. We need to look at what brings us together versus what divides us. And if people feel that this rhetoric of hatred, of division is what they need to feel good about themselves and feel superior, then that's on you, that's on your conscience. But this is not the way the world works. Historically, every single group in the entire history of humanity has migrated at one point or another. So what's the difference now? The borders are not fixed. 150 years ago, 175 years ago, the U.S. border that we have now didn't exist. So why is it that now all of a sudden, we're the aliens when the border was imposed on us? So it doesn't make any sense for us as the human race to start to label and dehumanize and victimize and blame people for problems that they themselves have themselves. Too often, Americans, for example, talk about Mexico bringing drugs into the United States, but what about the addiction itself? I mean, take some responsibility for your actions. Be accountable, and this is something that you talk about in this country, about individual accountability. So conservatives in particular can't have it both ways. They can't say that Ronald Reagan is their hero, is an icon, but Ronald Reagan is the one that gave us amnesty. Ronald Reagan, when he was alive, he can't tell the people in Berlin, tear that wall down, when the U.S. is building a militarized wall. So you can't have it both ways. Economists and conservatives can argue for free trade and allow for capital to roam freely around the world, but what about labor? Why do we praise capital but punish labor? So these are contradictions that makes no sense to me. And the only way we're going to move forward is by reframing the issue of immigration, is by humanizing the issue, and by having these expert panelists, these brilliant individuals. It's just a fine example of hearing their stories and the people that they deal with. For example, we have at UCLA, where Valeria talks about, what are some of the concrete negative impacts that the rhetoric by Trump and his ilk have on the students. I mean, you have a lot of students that suffer from mental depression and anxiety and stress because of the hurtful comments that are targeting them and their communities. This idea also, what we have is this false dichotomy of the good immigrant being the child and the bad immigrant being the parent, where the parent is the sinner because he brought the child in without their knowledge, is also a false one that we need to get away from. These human beings are rational beings, like my mother. I was actually conceived in Tijuana, La Colonia Libertad, and I was born in the United States. So I'm actually what Republicans refer to as an anchor baby, but I'm too thin to be an anchor baby because I don't weigh that much, so I don't know where the term comes from. So this is dehumanizing, and I reject that label, and I will not let anybody make me feel less than. I attended the best universities in the world, so why am I going to feel bad and feel inferior to an American that feels that I took his job, or that my mother took his job or her job? If that's the case, maybe you should go to the university too and not allow an immigrant to take your job. So these are the type of contradictions that I'm talking about, and I love the ideas that we're talking about today. So I want to change the topic a little bit and talk about some of the programs that are available to undocumented students at a federal level, which is DACA. We know that President Trump has not taken the steps to undo DACA. He's holding off on that, so it's a wait and see. But I'm going to start with Valeria and then Seth and then Evelyn. And what are your comments about what should undocumented students do in terms of enrolling, re-enrolling now that we have a hostile president towards immigrants?
Well, thank you for asking that question. That is a question that we've been getting a lot from students, particularly after elections. And unfortunately, we don't have an accurate or a one way to answer that question. During the campaign, President Obama did say that he would repeal DACA, and that sort of stood very vivid in our minds. But as you mentioned, it hasn't happened. So what we do is we tell our students what their options are, right? The option is to renew DACA if they have already been granted DACA, if they're willing to do so, and if they have the funds. The problem with renewing DACA at this moment is that we don't know what's going to happen. So recently, DACA, the cost of DACA went up to $495, and that's a big chunk of change, right? For students. So it's one of those things, like, we don't know what's going to happen. It may continue for a bit longer. We don't want to deny students that opportunity, but at the same time, telling them or having them invest in this and not end up getting it is very challenging. So what we do know and what our legal team at the UC has been saying is if you have not been granted DACA, or if you've not applied for DACA, do not apply for it at the moment, right? We want to wait to see what happens. When someone does apply for their DACA, their information goes directly to USCIS, and that's where I think a lot of concerns are as well. The information of more than 750,000 undocumented individuals who have been granted DACA is, it's somewhere. It's with USCIS, and that's scary for us. But for students who do have the financial capacity and they do want to go ahead and renew, we also support them in that renewal process. So it's a very difficult way to answer that question, but again, we let our students know what their options are, what may or may not happen, and we allow them to make that decision.
Okay, thank you, Valeria. Seth?
Yeah, I think on my end, Valeria has pretty much covered what I would like to say. I think I would just add, though, that there is so much uncertainty about DACA, and many DACA recipients have been breadwinners for their families or using that resource to be able to provide for themselves. And I think something that we really need to ask ourselves, especially allies, who claim to be allies for undocumented immigrants, is that if you are working with an undocumented immigrant, or if there is, if you are hiring a DACA recipient, or if you're working with a DACA recipient, what are you gonna do when DACA gets taken away? Are you just gonna fire that employee who has DACA because you can't legally do it anymore and let them just sort of figure out ways to survive moving forward? Or are you gonna take concrete steps to figure out, how to move forward with that? I think, like Alvaro was saying earlier, there's this, this I guess illusion of illegality, but I think often we get stuck in this term illegal, when we need to also critique, are laws even moral? There is this sort of convolution of morality and legality, and I think in many ways a lot of the policies that exist in this country, they may be legal, but are they moral? And I feel like that's really where we need to understand, how we're going to take steps, to be as supportive as possible to different undocumented immigrants.
Can I add one thing that I think was brought up based on what Seth just mentioned? And so for employers particularly, because we don't know the fate of DACA, we encourage you to continue to hire our DACA recipients, right? Let's not deny them of the opportunity that they can have if DACA continues to be, around. But I have been getting questions, and we need to move forward as if DACA is still around. We should not be thinking about, well, I don't know if DACA is going to be around next week. Should I even hire this person? We can't have that framework right now. We need to operate. We need to continue to support our students, our community members. We need to just move forward with giving them the opportunities that DACA does, just provide for them.
Yes, let me just make a few comments, and then I'll pass it to Evelyn if she wants to make a comment on this or a related comment. Is that the advice that I've received from legal experts, and I'm hoping that this is just one of many webinars that we have. For example, UCLA has some brilliant law professors that we can have them on a session just on that, just on the law and immigration, and for them to provide the legal interpretation of what we're dealing with DACA and related issues. But I would say that from what I know is that the people that are in DACA should continue it because the government already has your information. But for new people is to hold off, is to hold off because you don't want to give them that information that they can use against you in the future. President Trump is very unpredictable. You don't know what he's thinking, and I don't think he knows what he's thinking, in between his tweets. So we don't really know, nobody knows what he's going to do. I think politically, based on my assessment of the situation and looking at these matters for many years, is that he's looking at a situation where this is something that's going to backfire on him, where it'll rally too many people against him in terms of when you start to pick on children and kids and young adults. So I think he's focusing more on the wall and other issues and depriving federal funds from other programs to build a wall that Mexico will never pay for. But in terms of the DACA for new people, for new applicants, is to hold off for the people that are already in the system to reapply and continue with it as if nothing changed, really, because as of today, nothing has changed. So it'll just be it'll just be like a wait and see situation. But I agree with Valeria that we should not live in panic. We should not live in fear. We should not allow this to drown us on a daily basis, but it's just to move forward. So I'm gonna pass it on to Evelyn, and she can comment on this or any related issue.
Well, I wanted to actually touch on a question that we had heard was communicated by a member of the audience about what the difference is between undocumented and illegal, and what do these terms really mean. And I obviously I'll try to make it brief and see if you guys can chime in also. But for me, when I hear the word illegal and it is attached to illegal immigrant, illegal alien, which is highly offensive also, you're basically attaching this negativity to the person and not the action of one particular law that may have been violated in order to enter this country. Undocumented is a status, it is not the person. And that's why I tend to use undocumented more to describe, again, the status. And I am not an undocumented person. My status might be undocumented. And it's very difficult, I think, for people to kind of separate the two and understand why it might be so negative to hear human beings being referred to as aliens all the time. And it does take a toll. So one thing that I would encourage everyone to consider is, what words are important. Words matter, and how we communicate with one another. The terms really are just referring to whatever that immigration status happens to be at the time. But when you extend it into a negative word that it impacts the entire being, that's when I have a problem with it.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So I encourage people, we've been answering some of the questions, a lot of great questions have been asked throughout this webinar and prior, so I encourage people to ask others. There's been some questions about, is UCLA a sanctuary campus and things of that nature. What I would say on that is that we have received support from the chancellor, from the UC system, and then the Cal State system, from the leaders, and also there's been numerous private presidents of private universities around the world, around the country, that have expressed support for undocumented students. What we don't know what's going to happen in terms of because the federal government gives funds to these universities, how they're going to act in the reaction to that. But in terms of UCLA being an actual sanctuary campus, no, it's not. But the actual administration, the leaders of the UC system have expressed their support for undocumented students, and not voluntarily giving up or informing on their students and things of that nature. So I think California has done a great job in terms of the educational leaders. The representatives and the governor have done a great job in being leaders and being progressive leaders in the country about issues that have to do with undocumented students and their families, like driver's license, in-state tuition, and things of that nature. But in terms of having an actual sanctuary status, no, that doesn't exist, for any campus, at least in terms of the public universities, because of the funding issues. So we're hoping we get further questions, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to Valeria to comment also on what we've been hearing.
Sure. I do see another question, one question regarding more resources or conferences surrounding undocumented students. I want to share that there's a program coordinator at each UC campus, which is we've gone very far with really trying to support our students across the UC. Most individuals now have been in their positions for 2 years. So for the last two years and a half, students at other UCs have also had the opportunity to connect with a particular staff member who works, directly with the unique circumstances of undocumented students. I just saw earlier today that San Diego State will be hosting a second annual conference on undocumented students and higher education. They're accepting proposals if anyone's interested in it, presenting. But I attended last year. I had the opportunity to present, and it was such a great opportunity to connect with so many like-minded folks, so many educators who are really invested in our undocumented students succeeding academically. Other things that we are doing, I think another point to say is to reiterate what was said, California is really looking into how they can support the communities. One way that you can get involved is also if you're in LA, connecting with Mayor Garcia's office. They do have a work group specifically for this community. This will be an opportunity to share your voices, share your concerns, and continue to support our communities. Again, if you're in LA, that's an opportunity, but I will be sharing more resources, or I can share more resources that can be sent out to students or to participants about current conferences and other things that are happening regarding undocumented students.
And Alvaro, Dr. Huerta, I do have one event that it refers to what Valeria was discussing for the City of Los Angeles City Council. They have established an ad hoc committee on immigrant affairs, and they have their first kickoff meeting tonight, January 25th from 6 to 9 at LA City Hall in Council Chambers, room 340. And they are going to be taking comments from the public about how the city intends to or plans to, or how the residents expect to have the undocumented community supported. So you're invited.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we're about 2 minutes away, so I'm just going to thank everybody, all the panelists for participating, Valeria, Seth, and Evelyn, and also everybody who joined us for this webinar. What I recommend is that we continue with this discussion. This is only the first one we've had, so it's impossible to answer all of the questions, so we apologize for that. But all of us are available. Trump knows where I'm at, so he can find me anytime. So so if Trump can find me, anybody can find me in terms of follow-up questions, or for us to organize future webinars that have particular experts in the law, for example, or business. So for today, it was mainly to start a conversation and to put a face to the issue, so it's not just something that's very abstract. And as you can see, none of us are green, none of us look like we're from Mars, so none of us are aliens or illegal. So these terminologies should just go away, just like the N-word and just like other derogatory terms towards women and members of the gay community. So we need just to be human beings and be respectful and learn what we were taught as children, is do unto others as others would do unto you, and be kind to each other and be supportive. And at the end of the day, we're here to help each other, and go Bruins. Thank you.